Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2019 Iowa City Book Festival presented by Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We would like to thank our sponsors and partners who have made this event possible. The City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the City of Coralville, and the Iowa City Public Library, Prairie Lights, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, Sustainable Land Trust, University of Iowa Center for Human Rights, Think Iowa City, and Go Guide magazine. That list is much longer when reading it aloud than reading it on the paper. Between events, be sure to visit the book fair at Merge, which is just right next door on the Ped Mall. There you can shop with the artists, book publishers, sellers, and more. The vast majority of book festival events are offered at no charge, but they are not free. Your financial support gives us the ability to offer programs like this festival, so please consider donating at iowacitybookfestival.org. Today we will hear from Paula Becker. A House on Stilts tells the story of one woman's struggle to reclaim wholeness while mothering a son addicted to opioids. Paula Becker's son Hunter was raised in a safe, nurturing home by his writer-historian mother and his physician father. He was a bright, curious child, and yet addiction found him. Paula Becker is a writer and historian living in Seattle, Washington. She is the author of the book Looking for Betty MacDonald, The Egg, the Plague, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and I, and co-author of the books The Future Remembered, the 1962 Seattle World's Fair and Its Legacy, and Alaska-Yukon-Pacific Exposition, Washington's first World's Fair. More than 300 of Paula's essays documenting all aspects of Washington's history appear on historylink.org, the online encyclopedia of Washington state history, where she is a historian. Please help me welcome Paula Becker. Thank you.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here. This is my first visit to Iowa, so I'm enjoying it so much, and my first opportunity to meet the wonderful folks at University of Iowa Press who made this book a reality, and I'm so happy to be here. So I will also thank the Public Library and the Iowa City Book Festival. The Iowa City is a city of literature, and so is Seattle, where I'm from, and so I love the idea of bridging these two cities as UNESCO cities of literature, and I think it's a real honor to be invited to come and do that. So really happy for John Kenyon for bringing me here, Allison Means and Stasha Brownson, who are counterparts, Seattle and Iowa City, and I really appreciate that. I'd like to also recognize an organization called Shatterproof. Shatterproof is a national organization that is dedicated to ending the devastation that addiction causes families. They have advocacy alerts that you can sign up for, so if there's something that you're interested in getting involved politically, or just calling your representatives and saying, look, I support this or that, they will tell you who to call and what to say. So I suggest that you go to their website. I'll have a little of their literature afterwards if you're interested in knowing more about that. So thank you all for being here. Together we hold a space for my son Hunter's story, or really it's my version of Hunter's story. Hunter was a wonderful writer, and he would have written a wonderful book about his life. It would have been an interesting book, and I would very much wish that I could have read that book. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the presence of anyone here who is worrying for or possibly grieving someone who is battling with addiction or lost to it. I am very sorry for your pain, and I wish you strength. So here's what we're going to do this afternoon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the book came to be. I'm going to read you the prologue of the book, and then a couple of other sections, and then there'll be plenty of time at the end for question and answer. And then I would be happy to sign books if anybody would like me to do that. This book is about my journey toward grace and strength in the face of powerlessness. I think the fact that we are powerless is something that people get to eventually, especially parents, through many, many different ways. My path to this knowledge was my eldest son Hunter's battle with drug addiction. So I wrote A House on Stilts in the hope that other people who were struggling with a family member's addiction would know that they were not alone. When I was going through this, my husband and I felt very alone. There's a lot of judgment that you feel, whether the community is giving that out or not, or you feel very judged and feel very alone, and it's hard to open up and tell your story when everything the stakes are so high, when you're battling and worrying for a child's future. So I wanted to let other families know that they were not alone, and I particularly wanted to get the message to families who haven't gone through something like a family member's addiction, so that when those people encounter someone or a family where addiction is the battle that is happening, that they will respond with compassion rather than with judgment and with a soft heart. So my first step toward what nearly 7 years later would become A House on Stilts was we had been going through years of acting out defiance and eventually addiction with our oldest son, Hunter. And I was just trying to figure out what had happened when. I just wanted to put together a chronology, a timeline of when all these different things that had started happening when he was 15 and a sophomore in high school, and at the time had culminated in him going through several rehab situations. And at the time I started trying to figure this chronology out, he was living on the streets of Portland, Oregon. And it had come at me like a fire hose, right, for all those years. And all I was trying to do was figure out what happened when. And because I'm a writer and I'd written other books, once I had this chronology, you know, the narrative began to come to fill in the pieces. And I worked on it until I had a draft. I wasn't thinking this is a memoir I'm going to publish. I was just really still trying to stick that story down, to ground it for myself as much as for anything else. Once I had a draft, my son Hunter started doing better, as people do. And he came back to Seattle, he got housing, and he was doing really well for a couple of years. And during that time, I really thought about whose story this was. Was it my story? Was it Hunter's story? Well, of course, it was both our stories. It was my version of it. Who had the right to tell that story? I decided that I would set the manuscript aside. Hunter knew that it existed, and he kind of vacillated about his feelings of whether he thought it should be out there or not. And I always said to myself, well, if Hunter, you know, grows up and is doing great and says to me, oh, Mom, you're so right, other families need that hand to hold, go ahead and publish this book, that I would publish it. And I also knew in my heart of hearts that if he died, that I would probably pursue trying to publish it. And I say that because if you have a family member who battles opioid addiction, if you have a son who is using drugs, you have to hold in your heart the reality that that person might die. Of course, that's true with all of us, but you hold it in a different way and you sit with it in a different way when this is something that is happening day to day. So when Hunter died in June of 2017, a few months later, I turned back to the manuscript and worked on it and refined it. Of course, I had a very different take on it by that time. The first draft had a lot of anger in it, you know. I was so mad at what he had done to our family, what addiction was doing to him, the loss of what I perceived as his future. By the time I worked through this enough that I was ready to start submitting it, there was a lot more kind of overview, and University of Iowa Press was gracious enough to accept this book for publication. And then my editor, Jim McCoy, pushed me really hard, which was exactly what I needed. I thought I had already gone really deep into this really hard story. And he, with great grace, encouraged me to dive deeper into certain parts of it, especially to add context to some of the decisions that my husband and I had made during those years, and add history of what was happening in Seattle with regard to drug use in teenagers, homelessness, and addiction during that period of time. So I'm very, very grateful for that. So I would like to read you the prologue for the book. Hunter started high school in 2006, and the events of the prologue of this book occurred in 2010. You can all hear me, right? Okay. I am in the kitchen baking lemon black sesame seed muffins for my 18-year-old son, Hunter. It is a bright mid-July morning, and the sunlight is a soothing coda to the gray Seattle spring we've recently endured. Hunter is newly home from a 3-month drug rehab program where, his father and I desperately hope, he has been yanked back from his recent plunge into prescription opioid abuse. Our lives have veered savagely off the placid road that Hunter and his younger siblings, Sawyer and Lily, traveled with us in the years before Hunter started using drugs. Our old, safe patterns have become unfamiliar territory, but I am endeavoring to hold on to what is still familiar, baking these small mouthfuls of comfort, a new variation on a recipe I've followed perhaps 100 times. These should be lemon poppy seed muffins, since those are Hunter's favorites. This batch is meant to be a welcome home treat for him. But Hunter's sobriety, so fresh, prompts me to substitute black sesame seeds. Poppies are opiates, after all. Consuming them might spur a positive response on the opioid urine tests we are administering randomly. I take conservative precaution, substituting the benign dark specks for their narcotic counterpart. Hunter, meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, is downstairs in his basement bedroom shooting heroin. We realize, finally, we confront. Hunter bangs out the front door, running, clutching his bag of drugs, shouting, "These can't be in our house," to me, and "fuck you" to his father, bound for the street again. Once he is gone, I knit all day, huddled beneath a quilt in the overstuffed armchair where Hunter used to fall asleep when he was a toddler, board books and goldfish crackers by his side. I breathe, light some incense, knit some more. I write a poem, trying to frame the pain, to puncture it and pin it down like a butterfly, fixed to a board to contain it, but still it seeps and stains. None of my tricks deliver me to solid ground. There is no comfort, and I cannot find a way to save my son. Memories shimmer before me. Hunter's sweet young face, his easy, guileless laughter, his strong, small arms slung around my neck as he jumped up to hug me. Where is that little boy? What part of him still lives inside this drug-addicted teenager? Hunter's drugs mean that he cannot live with us, but we decide that on nights when he can't find a friend or fellow forlorn one to take him in, he can sleep in what we call the house on stilts, a treeless treehouse in our small backyard. He comes and goes. I leave fresh boxer shorts, jeans, a t-shirt. He leaves his dirty clothes, redolent of cigarette smoke and perspiration. I leave a sandwich, a box of Lily's homemade cookies, a bottle of water, vitamins, his toothbrush. He leaves a Q-tip, cotton, coaxed from the tip for what I guess must be no healthy purpose. We do not know when he will come and go. Stealthily, he avoids us, coming after dark, leaving before dawn. But I look out the kitchen window, and when my son is present, the stained glass windows of the house on stilts glow with the light of the small lamp within, like a church on Christmas Eve. It is my only solace, and it is fleeting, and I cling to it as I once clung to him, sweet-smelling, freshly bathed. Parenting publications often refer to parenting as a journey, promising to help moms and dads navigate each turn from birth to launch. I contributed for years to a Seattle magazine called Parent Map, such a reassuring title because, hey, if there's a map, parents can buy one, borrow one, forecast the road to come. Maps mean cartographers have charted the way. Road builders have leveled and landscaped it, or at the very least, some traveler has scratched the path with ciphers suggesting left is easy walking, right is the cliff. But being the parent of a teenager with addiction is like trying to navigate a dark room blindfolded. You bump around, desperate for clarity, feeling the objects in your path to try and figure what they are, tripping, falling. Occasionally, your blindfold shifts enough that you catch a glimpse in that infinitesimally less dark moment of what the room contains. Then the blindfold slips back, the darkness rendered even blacker by the fragment of paler dark. We were a family just like yours, perhaps. We loved and protected each other, read Harry Potter books, picked apples and peeled them and added sugar and cinnamon and baked them into pies. We followed the recipe. We followed the rules. Barry and I knew we were not perfect, but we could sometimes feel perfection in the moments we shared. People who looked at us thought, blessed children, lucky mom and dad. We did not know it when we lived these years, but we were taking part in opioid addiction's horrific zeitgeist. We numbered among the now legion middle and upper middle class families previously privileged not to have experienced opioids' ruinous effects, among the parents who thought their children impervious to this scourge. America flails now in the teeth of the wolf that is addiction. Opioids, black market, and legally prescribed have become, for millions of families, their personal pathology. Families have always struggled when a member was abusing, often silently, usually in shame. American society struggles openly now because the growing consumption of illicitly manufactured fentanyl-laced heroin means more people are dying. Use can be disguised or contained within families. Death cannot. We now acknowledge, and we must, that opioid addiction cuts across all barriers: economic, racial, educational, age, and gender. My family's deeply personal story has become universal. This is the story of my journey as a mother down years of unmarked road, of grasping blackness, begging for clarity. It is my story, but there were others walking, sometimes crawling the path with me. My husband, Barry, our middle son, Sawyer, our daughter, Lily, and Hunter, our beloved eldest child, careening, slashing, plunging, pounding ahead. So, jumping way, way back now. You know, when something happens like this to you as a parent, the natural thing is to say, what did I do wrong, right? And when you're saying, what did I do wrong, you go all the way back. You look all the way back. You know, did I take the prenatal vitamins? What happened? What happened in those earliest years? So I want to read you a little bit about how Hunter was as a little boy, just a little bit. He was born in Washington, D.C., and we lived there until he was 18 months old. And then Barry and Hunter and I moved to Seattle. He was a fearless child. Extremes of every sort delighted him. No dark could ever be too dark, no snow too cold, no story too intense, no bridge or cliff or overlook too high. Hunter began to walk at 9 months, to talk when other children were still pointing. He made us know his fearlessness in words and actions. He'd grin and clench his fists and grrr. Hunter, you're fierce, Barry and I would say. Fierce, he'd reply. Fierce like a dinosaur. Fierce like a shark. We climbed the towering play structure at a park in Maryland. Hunter's small fingers gripped the bars that kept him safe, and he leaned into the winter-cold steel with all his might, as if to push those bars aside. "Long way down," he chortled. "Long way down." He turned and launched himself toward the small hole in the structure's floor, the place we'd climbed to by climbing up a slippery ladder. My fingers gripped the back of his cherry red snowsuit. "Hunter," I cried, trying to telegraph the need for caution without squelching his spirit. "Hunter, it is a long way down. We need to be careful." There were so many moments just like this in Hunter's childhood. Later, they came to seem like metaphors. As Hunter grew, as he began to rush toward danger ever more deliberately, I wished 1,000 times for the ability to grab him, pull him back, make him see how high up he'd clambered, how truly far his plunge might be, and what smashing into the ground would mean. I struggled to know just which well-intentioned choice I'd made might be to blame for my son's drug addiction, to know what flaw I'd let slip into all my plans, to understand what I had missed that led us to this swift unraveling. I was his mother, after all. How could I not have seen this coming? Well, of course, that's the question. And that's what we get to through the book, the idea of how little we control. We moved to Seattle. Sawyer was born when Hunter was 3 years old. Lily was born when Hunter was 6 years old. I was home with the kids. I had left my job as a subscription manager at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. when Hunter was born, and we decided that we would homeschool. I was very happy to be able to be home with children. I did miss my work very much, but I felt like I was the only one who could be doing this job of raising my children, and we were going to go ahead and homeschool. So we did that through the time that Hunter was in middle of the 7th grade, and by that time the younger kids had started into school, and Hunter decided that he also wanted to go to school. So I was very aware of the fact that he had never been in any classroom except kind of homeschool resource center classes, and I watched very carefully as he began to make that transition into middle school, and he seemed to do okay. He made friends. He finished middle school and started high school, and again it looked good. He was on the honor roll. But as he was getting academic traction in high school, he was failing again and again to kind of catch social traction, not really interested in joining the clubs, not interested in participating in things he'd been interested in before. Pretty soon he found connection with the group of kids that stood across the street from school, right, smoking cigarettes and kind of bumming around there and skipping class, and I think every public school has that. In private schools, they often will go and hide in the kid's car, but that group is present at every school. And in his sophomore year, he started spinning out of control. It was really hard for us to see what was happening immediately, and of course we knew him very well from his whole childhood, knew the kind of kid he was, and kept having faith that that boy who was so sensible would reemerge. Nevertheless, the spinning out of control went on, rebellion, acting out, sneaking out at night, starting to smell some liquor on his breath, sometimes cigarettes. So this little part that I want to read you now took place when he was in the sort of the end of his sophomore year. And it describes a bit how Hunter's rebellion at this point was impacting our family. I was now waking multiple times each night, as sleepless as Hunter himself had been as an infant, frightened for him and furious that Barry and I had not found means of controlling his behavior. "I love Hunter so much, you know," I told Barry one morning as I packed Lily's lunchbox and drained my second cup of coffee, "but lately he's getting pretty damn hard to like. I feel like nothing I say to try and reason with him works. It's like a bowl I used every day has suddenly sprung holes and turned into a sieve. Every bit of wisdom I pour into Hunter now drains right out." At least Barry and I agreed, consistently, repeatedly, nearly unwaveringly, on what our response to Hunter's behavior should be. Like any couple, we had differences to be fought and negotiated through. But as Hunter's behavior tested us, we presented a unified front. Agreeing didn't keep us from going round and round, trying to understand why this was happening by comparing Hunter with ourselves at his age. We spent lunch at nearby Thon Brothers, which is a Vietnamese pho soup chain in Seattle, bent over steaming bowls of aromatic pho, repeating the same lines. "I never acted out like this," Barry would start. And I'd say through gritted teeth, "But Hunter is not you." When I was his age, I might say, a few bites later, oblivious to the contradiction. "It doesn't make sense," Barry would continue. We did this often, sometimes daily. It was a drawn-out version of the brief parenting crisis we'd plunged into years earlier, visiting Hampton Court when Hunter was 9. I carried Lily in the sling. The boys danced ahead of us, eager to reach the center of the famous hedge maze. "Can we find our own way out?" they'd bubbled when we were well inside. "Well, okay," Barry allowed, and they were gone, laughing. Within 30 seconds, Sawyer began to scream. Barry and I stood rooted, frozen, right in the middle of the hedge maze. "Where are they?" I cried. The screaming continued. "What's happening? Oh, God, how do we get out of here?" I turned on Barry wildly for not knowing. He blasted me back for panicking. We found the boys soon enough, still together, Sawyer's heel nicked and bloody, the pair of them otherwise unharmed. He had clicked it on the turnstile. My trauma lingered. Barry and I vowed never to venture into a hedge maze again. But Hunter was leading us now into a deeply threatening enclosure. Disoriented, desperate, bent over our bowls of pho, the maze surrounded us. So high school continued, and we played the kind of sort of desperate cat and mouse game. Things would be fine for a while. His grades would be okay. He would seem to be going to school, and then there would be some eruption. He would be found down in the University District of Seattle with, alcohol in an open container. He would have snuck out of a friend's house. The police began occasionally bringing him home. The truancy was getting worse. But somehow we got through high school, and he was passing enough grades that he was going to, do okay. However, by the time he turned 18, which was the spring of what would have been, his senior year in high school, something happened that made us realize that things were a lot worse than we were, and that really changed the course of our family's trajectory and of Hunter's. Hunter had dabbled enthusiastically with pot, with Adderall, with alcohol, maybe with acid. Now, in the first months of 2010, around the time he turned 18, he turned to opioids. Hunter responded to this new substance with the same enthusiasm he'd shown when he embraced trains, chapter books, and the Titanic. He was all in. The first thing that happened was this. I couldn't find the Reynolds wrap. "Where is the foil?" I asked Sawyer and Lily. "Did either of you take it for a craft project?" They had not. I wandered through the house, puzzled, ended up in Hunter's room. The box of foil protruded from a heap of laundry. I thought that's odd, as I returned it to the kitchen. Later, we started finding bits of foil, burned on one side, sticky and black on the other. Cheap ballpoint pens, the ink part missing, their empty plastic exteriors straw-like. Sometimes I'd wake in the night smelling smoke, feeling the terror of an unknown something somewhere. The house was not safe. Something was not right. Barry and I, or both, would descend to the basement, sniffing, quiz Hunter. "I lit incense," he'd sometimes say, or, "Nothing. There's nothing burning. What are you talking about?" We never saw him burning whatever it was, but evidence piled up. Broken pens, the foil, notebook paper covered with doodles. I could not read at first, but soon resolved into Fen, 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 over and over forever, a love song. The details of these days are clouded, full of holes. I know I was working on my second book. I know Barry was working 3 or 4 12-hour urgent care shifts each week. Now cash began disappearing from my wallet. $5 here, 10 there. Barry ran almost every day, leaving his wallet in our bedroom closet, where more than once I stumbled upon Hunter. When did the evidence become undeniable that Hunter was stealing money and that he was using one drug consistently, not just pot, bad enough to my mind, not just alcohol, again, not good? Self-deception is a powerful urge. Smelling liquor on his early morning breath sophomore year, I told myself it couldn't be. Stumbling on the foil now, my mind flipped, spun, through every possible reason it might be there except the truth, trying to unsee the evidence, feeling the pull of fear's deep, inescapable well. Around the time we started finding the burned foil, around the time my eyes decoded the scribbled word fragment, I Googled fen, fentanyl, the screen whispered, a powerful synthetic opioid used to control pain in cancer patients, used during surgery, 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. The drug of choice, my Googling informed me, among anesthesiologist substance abusers. Expensive, very, extremely deadly if misused. The drug, when abused, is often heated to release its vapors, which are then inhaled. That was the purpose of the disassembled pins. Their shells were straws, conduits for vaporized fentanyl. So we confronted Hunter. He left the house for several days, which was terrifying. It was the first time that he had been homeless. I mean, it was only a few days, but it gave us a taste of what it felt like to have him not coming home at night and not to know where he was. And of course, my mind immediately jumped to everyone I saw sleeping on the street and in the doorways. Seattle has a massive homeless population. We're third after New York and San Francisco. And so the idea that all of those people could be my son or my son could be the one under those blankets immediately took hold in me. After a couple of days, Hunter came back and he said he agreed he would go to rehab. We sent him to rehab. He was there for 3 months and then came back, and then we get to the events of the prologue, right? And I'm making the lemon black sesame seed muffins. After we discovered that he was using heroin, he again left the house. It was a hard but very immediate decision for us that he could not live in the house while he was using heroin. We had 2 other children, younger children. It was stark and extremely painful, but absolutely a strong decision for us. So as I mentioned in the prologue, Hunter lived for a while in this place we called the House on Stilts. And this is the last piece that I want to read to you today, a little bit about how that situation resolved itself. So Hunter had just turned 19 in the House on Stilts. I put a little box of coconut birthday cake out there for him with a note saying I loved him. Hunter seemed to realize he was heading for some kind of bottom. He had been living in the House on Stilts for nearly 2 months when he asked me to give him a ride to King County Detox. So this House on Stilts was literally like a playhouse or a treehouse built on stilts in our tiny little backyard. So it was as close to, if I was on the back porch, it was as close as you people in the middle are there. He asked me to give him a ride to King County Detox. I've called them for days waiting for a bed, he told me, and they'll have one this evening. I need to be there by 7. I felt a surge of hope. Hunter wanted detox, and he had taken the action required to arrange it himself. Of course, I said, of course I'll drive you. It was the pitch-black early evening of Seattle in March. Heading to detox, Hunter looked unsurprisingly terrible. He smelled of cigarettes and stale sweat. I'd map-quested King County Detox, and the route was familiar. the same road we'd taken every Thursday for 5 years, the first years we lived in Seattle, en route to our weekly Lunch with Daddy Day at Barry's old community clinic. I remembered reaching back to hold Hunter's small hand as he traveled in his car seat, listening to Guy Clark cassettes. King County Detox was housed in an old facility, shabbily utilitarian, with picture windows into every room. These windows shone a cold fluorescent light as we pulled up, framing the stultified patients inside. Some curtains were drawn, some people perched on beds, others curled into themselves, others paced. Reception was beyond a locked entryway. If hotel reception areas strive to be inviting and hospital receptions attempt to calm, King County Detox shouts, "You are lucky that you're not in jail. This is a bench in hell, but at least you haven't yet burst into flames. Get the fuck in or don't, we don't much care." That's actually harsh, but that's how I felt. "Should I go in with you?" I asked, steeling myself for the judging eyes of whoever kept the gate. "I'll do it," Hunter said quickly, "but if you could wait for a while, just to be sure they let me in." We hugged. I told him he was doing a good thing for himself, and he shut the car door. Standing outside the detox under thin light, he waited to be buzzed in, and then was gone. The neighborhood felt dangerous. I pulled my car to the parking lot's edge, then thought better of it when I noticed someone crouched there, smoking or doing something else. Closer to the building, I tried to see what was happening in the reception room. Hunter was there, then he wasn't, then he was again. Then he seemed to have been taken deeper into the facility. I tried his cell phone, but of course they'd taken it from him. Eventually, I drove back home. For a few days, I pictured Hunter safe in detox. I held the thought of him experiencing some kind of peace. After a week, it seemed strange that he had not yet called. I phoned the detox. "Is he still a patient?" "Hunter," the woman said. "We don't have a Hunter." "Oh, Hunter. He left last week. Wasn't here 48 hours. I hung up the phone and climbed into the house on stilts, feeling its desolation. My hope for Hunter over the past days had been tentative, fragile, but it had been hope. I couldn't know where Hunter was, couldn't undo his drug addiction, couldn't make him do anything that matched my choices. I saw that a little more fully now. I could, however, set the house in Stilts in order. I grabbed a laundry basket from the basement and piled Hunter's filthy, stinking clothes into it. Later, I would sort them, the colors dulled by grime, the darks soiled invisibly, the whites so far beyond bleaching, I threw them in the trash. I washed what clothes I could. When they were dry, I folded them neatly and stacked them in Hunter's old wardrobe in the basement area formerly known as Hunter's room. I tossed the sleeping bag, the pillows, the homeless person blanket onto the grass outside the house on stilts. Some would be washed, some thrown away, some donated. Filled a trash bag with the debris of Hunter's residency, old food, some of it moldy, scraps of newspaper, the untouched ballot, discarded drug tools, sky blue rubber strips, cigarette lighters, burned spoons, blaze orange needle caps, syringe wrappers he had been using. We had known that, although we had turned a blind eye. I put the camping lantern in the basement and the Harry Potter volumes back in the living room bookshelf. I swept the floor, and then I scrubbed it on my hands and knees. When I was done, the space was cleansed and empty. The next day, Barry would fit the door with a lock. I sat on the floor and breathed, thinking of Hunter, knowing he'd been alive in this place and loved, knowing that his time here had not changed his situation, even as it damaged and compromised and reassured and comforted and debased the rest of us. I cried, and then I climbed down the rope and reached back up to shut the door. So, Thank you for holding on through all of that. I know it's hard. It's hard to hear. It's big. It's a big story. And I wish it weren't so many people's story, but I'm very grateful to be able to be out there holding hands with all the other people whose story it is. And I would be very happy to answer any questions for you about anything.
So we're going to maybe turn this on. Is this? It's on. Got it. We're going to use the mic for questions because this is being recorded so that we can have better sound. So any questions to start off?
I know it's scary. Any questions? Yes.
You know, recently we've been hearing quite a bit of talk about settlements or proposed settlements with drug companies, manufacturers. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, does that really mean anything to the addicts or the future addicts or any prevention at all?
Well, that's a good question. So the question is, do the settlements we've been hearing about with you know, the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, they're not enough. They're a drop in the bucket. I think that we have vastly underestimated as a society the amount of effort, long-term effort, it takes to help a young person who is trying to claw their way out of addiction, to get that person to a point where they're back in society, ready to have a job and be a productive member of society. You know, it is not, for most people, a matter of 30 days in rehab, if people are lucky enough to have that. It's not enough just to have, you know, an in and out with that. There has to be a roof over that person's head. Addiction treatment has to be evidence-based. 12-step is great for people that works for, but it doesn't work for everybody. And I would say my experience is the younger the person is and the maler the person is, the less well the 12-step can work for you know, drug addiction. And so medications that assist with opioid recovery, like Suboxone, naltrexone, and methadone are options that we should make available. Most treatment programs don't let, and many jails don't let people use those drugs, those harm reduction drugs, when they're in the program, and I think that's bad. That needs to stop. We need to take a wraparound approach to making sure that people who are attempting recovery are supported, that they have mental health care, and that they have a roof over their heads. And that's going to take a lot of money. But those settlements are a part of it, and our state of Washington has been, you know, part of the lawsuits that have tried to bring those pharmaceutical companies to justice. The other thing is, I don't know what the law is in this state, but I carry naloxone, which is Narcan. Narcan is a medication that will revive a person who has overdosed. I think it's something every parent should have in their arsenal at home, and hopefully you'll never have to use it, just like you hope you don't have to use the baby Tylenol or whatever it is you have in your medical kit. It might not be your kid, but it might be some friend that comes over for a sleepover or a study group. You don't know. All I had to do was go into the drugstore and fill out a form saying this was for someone that I didn't know. You know, I didn't know who it was for. And I do it sort of as a political statement, but I really do think that anyone who has any contact, especially with young people, should consider having, you know, Narcan. It's really easy to use. I'm adding on to your story, but yeah. Anybody else? Other questions? Yes, you have a question?
So I used to live in Seattle, and just to talk about that specifically, I'm thinking of that. I'm guessing you came upon that documentary that King 5 did.
Yes.
I found it problematic. There was a documentary that a local news station did where they really framed, there is a really serious problem in Seattle, but they really framed it from a perspective of like, Seattle has a problem with trash. Like there was so many B-roll shots of trash in the streets, which is a problem. But what do you think they should really be doing in these big cities to kind of, what should we be doing instead? Because obviously that is not the right choice.
Well, one of the things, so what should cities be doing to deal with the problem of drug abuse on the streets? One of the things that we do in King County and also Snohomish County, which is the county to the north of our county, is that there's a concentrated effort to get treatment for users, not to arrest users, but to get them into treatment. And that is a really, really good thing. There's also drug court, which is something that people who have a charge or a conviction that's a drug conviction, but instead of going to jail, they agree to jump through a lot of hoops, and also involving, being abstinent from the drug, getting a lot of support, keeping a job, and coming and reporting to the court very frequently about their progress. So they can do that instead of spending time in jail. And I went and observed drug court, as Hunter never was involved with the criminal justice system to that level as an adult. He had some youth convictions, but I observed it as part of doing the research for this book, and I think it's amazing. And to see the advocates who show up for some of these people who are in recovery, who will say, he really is doing better, and here's why, ABC. I think that that's a really, really important thing. You cannot arrest a person into recovery. So, treatment. Anybody else? You want to tell me anything about what the drug addiction and homelessness situation is in Iowa City? I don't know too much. I don't see people on the streets. Do you have a homelessness issue? You do. Yes.
What we find here is we have a lot of wonderful services for people who are home insecure here in Iowa City. We do actually have a Housing First program here, which is wonderful. We just put in 24 units.
Housing First meaning that you get the person housed and then start working on helping them if they're, getting to the point where they're ready to start dealing with their addiction issues, which is very important. To have a person on the street, unsheltered, ready to go through what you go through and trying to get off of drugs, it feels unrealistic to me. So housing is really important.
And that was actually, it was a large coalition of nonprofits that did that, and one of the big groups that was really working on that was our police department, believe it or not. But we do have a wonderful police department here who are super thoughtful about these issues. And we actually have a local downtown beat cop whose job it is to kind of get to know people who are on the street here in town, and that way they know him personally, like on a first name level, before something bad happens. But you talked about naloxone and who can carry that. There's actually a lot of controversy in libraries, just nationally, about whether or not it would be a librarian's job to do something like that. And so there are some people who are like, we are around folks who need this, we're here, we should have this. And then other people are like, we studied to share literature. We don't want to be someone's doctor. So it's a controversial topic in librarianship too.
It's true.
Just all nonprofits are dealing with these issues.
I would say, to me, it feels very similar to learning CPR. I mean, we all kind of agreed that everybody should do that. And a librarian, while they trained to be a librarian, if someone dropped of a heart attack, you're going to go and start to try to do CPR if you know them. And to me, the Narcan is the same kind of thing. And the Food and Drug Administration just came out and said they think Narcan should be over the counter. So you may see this, more, easily available soon. We also have those teams in Seattle, in fact, whole teams whose job it is to go out and interact with people who are living in homeless encampments, help them to get to services if they're ready for services, make those relationships so that maybe they're not ready today, but they might be ready in a week, and so they know how they can reach out when they're ready, because you cannot be ready for someone else to be in recovery. You can't get them into recovery. If mommies could do that for their children, there would be no addicted young people. We would do it just like we buckle them into their car seats, right? And that's part of the complexity of it. Any other questions? Yes.
I read your book in 2 days, and in the prologue I started crying. I said I read your book in 2 days, and the prologue I started crying. I have a grandson in that situation, and my daughter and her husband cut him off, and I followed your book, and At first, I thought it was so hard, and then as I read your book, it started to make more sense to me.
Wow.
So it kind of unfolded and opened up the emotions, and I saw why you did what you did.
Thank
It was
you.
very touching, and it was an awesome book. I loved it.
Thank
I mean, it
you.
was so emotional, but I was reading it last night, laying in bed, and the tears were going down my cheeks. Like,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's and I hold a heart, you know, hold your grandson in the light and hold him up with my heart. I think parenting books, you know, are always prescriptive. You might not agree with, you know, put the baby down and let him cry it out, or don't put the baby cry. But the books are going to tell you, this is our way, do it this way, do it this way. That is not how it works when you have a child with addiction. You get to make a lot of decisions, and they're different every time, and none of them are the right choice. They're just the choice that seems the less wrong at the moment. And I think it's good to actually claim that for parents so that they don't think, oh my God, I can't make the right choice. There is no right choice. You're doing your best, right? Thank you all so much. I would be happy to sign books. And if you like the book, please spread the word. I'm trying to get everybody, an army of people out there talking about this book. That really is how people know about a book like this, is through word of mouth. So help out with that. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.